Ito, and welcome to Radicals for Good, a podcast about the quiet revolutions unfolding around us. My name is Shayla, and we are here at Moondog Cafe, sending them our gratitude for letting us use their space today. Radicals for Good is hosted on Wawiyat-Tanan, the lands of the Anishinaabe peoples, whose presence and resilience is still maintained today. We honor those who have made Detroit liberation possible. I'm here with an independent journalist and community organizer, Ethan Bakuli. Thanks for being here, Ethan.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, welcome. I'm glad that you're finally on the podcast.
Yeah, time coming. It's great to, we've been scheduling it and now we're here.
We're here. Yeah. So in this episode, we want to talk about community-centered journalism and how we can utilize non-traditional or non-mass media, right?
Yeah.
You've been a journalist for over 9 years. Can you talk a little bit about your journey to get there and how it intersects with community organizing?
Yeah, of course. I guess to start, I always preface I'm a major introvert, so I did not imagine myself talking to people for a living. It was not in the cards at all. But I guess to go all the way back to the origins, I grew up in Western Massachusetts, not in Detroit, so it's like a very unknown part, I think, of the country for most people, but there, we've got the Five College area where there's a lot of these artsy, liberal arts colleges, farmers, but my family in particular, a lot of folks, my parents came from Kenya with my brothers. I was born here in the US, but we kind of came into this area that was a bed for other African, Caribbean, Latin American immigrants, and so I think that's where community really started for me. You know, despite the fact that I grew up in New England, very white, lily white place, I felt like having that community of immigrants really grounded me in all the ways that they were telling stories, all the ways that they were gathering folks around food, around celebration, around at times, grief. And I think that really gave me a perspective on how I wanted to far down the road be able to tell stories with that perspective in mind. How am I reaching people like my mom and my aunts and uncles who I felt were not reflected in the media that I was growing up in. I didn't really see people who were telling stories on the news broadcasts that looked like me or my family or understood all the things that were going on. We were just hidden, even though we were part of this community. There were so many ways that we were showing up. So fast forward to just, being in high school, I was in high school around the time of the first iteration of BLM. We were losing a lot of folks across the country, and I pivoted towards organizing. Started a high school chapter of Black Lives Matter to really just get to the root of for the small fraction of Black students that were at my school, we were dealing with all these micro and macro aggressions, and we were seeing these instances of police brutality happening on TV, and just feeling how can we have these conversations? How can we convene people, our classmates, our teachers, our community members to really grapple with this? No matter where we are in the country, we're facing these issues in different ways. And so that kind of gave me this opportunity before I was in news media to really just understand the importance of cultivating and gathering folks around these big topic issues at the local level. And then by the time I was in college, I was trying to make sense of how do you transition from doing organizing into a career, if that's what I want to do or not. I was studying Black Studies, and then I randomly found my way into journalism, which we can get more into, but it was just this blend of wanting to actually capture and respond to all these issues that I was seeing in my community, lack of affordable housing, environmental pollution, gun violence, food apartheid. All of that was in front of me quite vividly, and I just felt trying to document it was one of the best tools I had.
That's really powerful, Ethan, to know that your family, your community isn't being represented, and so you are taking it upon yourself to represent that community in this. So that's really powerful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing that. And I know you are always showing up in community. I think that's actually how we came across each other, was at one of the gardens.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about that. Like, talk to me about how journalism and community organizing intersect currently for you.
Yeah, currently, I mean, it's the backbone of what I do. I don't, I was in journalism for about 6 or so years before I was laid off and pivoted to independent journalism, freelance reporting. And I think up until that point, I always wanted to be doing community work. I always was seeking out stories that reflected like oftentimes really marginalized folks in our communities. But it felt like the newsrooms that I was in had their own bottom line, specifically about like we need to like be telling these stories that are going to get more subscribers, are going to get more donors, all that kind of stuff. But we weren't telling the stories that I felt oftentimes community really wanted us to dive deep and get into nuance. And so, when I was laid off,
I can imagine it was like really cutthroat environment too.
yeah, it was tough. It was like, a lot of the stories I was doing for this one place, I lived in Vermont for a couple of years reporting for this very small news outlet. And they would basically top of the morning always asking you to write these like quick hit stories that could have been anything from like, what are the top 10 dog breeds in Vermont? And that was and that was a way to kind of like, those stories were quick and easy. They don't require too much leg lift. And the rationale was that would support you in getting to do the longer form stories that you want to tell. But it felt like I was just like sometimes wasting my energy on stories that like were very superficial and
the top
really,
10 dogs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't even tell you what they were at the time, but it's just like, I guess that was what they felt. Or like ice cream, like where to get ice cream on ice cream day or something like that. Like, so there are all these ways that like, I definitely think, in this moment of like click, what we're getting clicks for, what we're getting like reader eyes on and like ad revenue from, we were just kind of forcing our storytelling to match market, forces and capitalism in ways that I felt like were not conducive to like this homegrown storytelling that I wanted to do. So when I got laid off back in 2023, that was kind of like this moment where I had a lot of freedom. I got a severance package. I was like trying to figure out what's next for me. And I started going to a community garden. And from there just kept on going to more and more because I was just like, spending my time volunteering was really a way to connect with people across the city here in Detroit that I hadn't really before. Talking to a lot of elders, talking to a lot of transplants, talking to, Gen Z, young folks, people, millennials, and really just getting an understanding of like, what are these issues and like, how are people using growing food and land cultivation as a space to actually come together around these really big issues happening in the community, gentrification, just the, again, lack of grocery access across the city. So that was really meaningful to me and got me to really also eventually get into like environmental reporting and agriculture reporting because, as we're seeing with climate disasters here across the city, flooding, heat waves, wildfires, all that stuff, like the wildfire smoke we get from Canada, like, there's just so much pressing things, I didn't even mention, obviously like asthma rates because of like pollution from all this industry that's like layered around the city and around the area. So I really feel like taking the approach of going to community and volunteering was a way to like reshape my journalism to something that I think a lot of people could really resonate with, which was like telling stories about the ways that we're connecting to the land, connecting to our water and our air and trying to protect it as much as possible.
Oh, that's so important. We need that too. Yeah. So I think too, like being in community is helpful for your journalism and it's also helpful for community too, and to build that, to build community as well. And I'm wondering too, like, how does journalism strengthen, or how do you go about protecting our community members in journalism, right? Like, how do you find the boundary between talking with community and being a journalist?
Yeah, that is a weighty. I'm actively thinking through that each and every day because I think there's a lot of gray area to how journalists traditionally try to, particularly I'd say in mainstream media spaces, try to engage with community members. I was just thinking the other day, it's like traditionally we give a lot more grace and consideration to government officials. You know, these sources that, you know, are coming from the top down. We definitely give a lot more credibility. That's basically what's taught to you. Like when I was in journalism school, like there's a lot of just baked in, like, oh yeah, you want to get the public official comment. You want to make sure that like whatever story you write, you're getting their record on it. You know, for liability reasons, all this other stuff. And I think that just decenters the people, you know, it decenters the bottom up and the grassroots in ways that I think is very harmful. I think journalism in this current moment is really wrestling with that because, you know, you have all these topics, conversations around misinformation and disinformation and like trust in media. And I think trust in media isn't there because people actively see the ways that like not only how corporate media operates, but how it just doesn't center and really want to be in conversation, be in solidarity with community. So I think for me, what's helped me in this current moment for my work the last few years is really just like understanding my place in the community. You know, when I was doing journalism in other places, there was often this feel like you're supposed to be removed. You know, you're supposed to be like objective and neutral and separate. And I think, you know,
unbiased.
Right.
Yeah. Well, quote, unbiased.
Yeah. And I think in more recent years, like the conversation around like objectivity just being bullshit has been very clear now. That like there is bias in everything. You know, I strive for fairness and accuracy. And I've learned that through folks like Ida B. Wells and Nicole Hannah-Jones and countless other people who have like produced journalism that I think gets to the root of these really critical issues. But yeah, I think to what for me, I show up to a lot of places, like we talked about. You know, I volunteer at a lot of places. I try to keep my ear as low to the ground as possible because it's important to understand like what's the nuance. Like if I'm just showing up when there's a big event, then I'm not really getting all the behind the scene things. You know, I'm not really getting the intricacies of how people are trying to create these actions and how our movements actually work. You know, I think a school of thought that I've really been embracing as of late, it's called like movement journalism. Others call it solidarity journalism or emancipatory journalism. And there are all these different ways of saying basically like we need to be affirming the movements that are happening in real time to change our communities for the better. And not just be so focused on like trying to just be in this conversation with these institutions that we know are failing people day in and day out. Like if you care more about getting cushy with police officers and mayoral candidates and all this stuff, then like you're really missing what people need right now, which is for their journalists to really be accountable to them and to really hold those bigger institutions accountable. Because I'm just not seeing that nearly as much with a lot of media, not just across the city, but, you know, obviously across the country, the globe, like so many ways that we don't even explicitly name capitalism or imperialism when we're talking about these bigger issues. Confuses people around what the actual problem is.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I've probably rambled, but I think just getting to the idea of like when we're more in lockstep with community, I think we have a clearer idea of like what is causing the most harm and how we can actually like seek out ways to like address that.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I really appreciate that. And I think that's where independent media kind of comes into play too. Can you talk about like the difference between mass media and independent journalism, and just, your experience with them as well?
So yeah, I think, you know, and it's something I've thought a lot more about recently because I came from one of my first professional jobs was working at this, like, at one point it was like the largest paper in the state that I was working at. Then, you know, because of budget cuts, because of consolidation of media, because of hedge funds coming in, like it became very smaller. It went from a team of like dozens of reporters down to like 10 or so people. And so like media as it currently operates, whether you're privately funded by a company, like a lot of times there are reporters doing more work with less people there. And it's created like the same thing we see across a bunch of industries, you know, across the automotive industry, like all these ways that like folks who I think have good aspirations to tell stories and want to be community reporters are being forced to just be more like stenographers for like different institutions and not really able to like spend the time in community or do all the things. So I felt like that was like the challenge I saw in those spaces, to the point that I wanted to transition to nonprofit media, because I felt like, oh, you know, I've heard so much about nonprofits, like they're supposed to be more humane, like people who actually want to resolve the tensions that they saw in corporate media or in this privately funded media. But, you know, there's a reason we call it nonprofit industrial complex. I think in a lot of ways, like folks who are operating in these nonprofit spaces, a lot of the senior positions people have come from that corporate media. And so a lot of the same practices, a lot of the same like rushed 24/7 news cycle regurgitates itself. And that can create a lot of harm for younger reporters.
And a lot of the same funding sources
Right.
come from the same corporate media source. Like that is the source of funds
Right.
for that nonprofit.
These foundations, you know, they might be philanthropic in nature, but they might still get their funding from a lot of these terrible things that we're seeing sort of play out. So it's like that contradiction that really comes about when you understand just how to operate in these spaces. You know, there isn't neutrality in them. There isn't the sense of objectivity in them, because clearly, as we've seen with more recent events, like particularly I'm thinking about since October 7th, like there's just a way that like our media isn't, specifically corporate media and even nonprofits to some extent, are built to kind of respond to what's actually happening. It's built to sort of like cushion what the board of directors or the donors are really wanting to sort of happen and continue to operate under for their bottom dollar.
I think that's where like the idea of following the money comes in too. Like you have to follow the money and see who exactly is funding that news source, because that kind of dictates how people are telling stories or not telling stories at all, right? We saw that with the Palestine genocide too, or the killing of Palestinian journalists.
Yeah.
Where journalists were being killed and mass media wasn't really talking about it.
Right.
And now we're not seeing a lot of media come from Palestine, and that's because the journalists are no longer there. So I think, like, to your point, independent journalism is so incredibly important. And I also wanted to talk a little bit about zines and like non-traditional media, maybe media that we don't normally see. I would also consider this podcast to be like non-traditional media too. But tell me, you publish a zine. It's amazing.
Thank you.
We can share it a little bit. Tell me about how you got to that. Got to publishing that.
So I think one of the joys I have with being an independent journalist right now is that, you know, besides just like barely making any money, but I find a lot of free opportunities. You know, I seek out a lot of opportunities in the community to really grow and to develop, you know, because I don't have necessarily the backing of a bigger institution, you know, to really do stuff. And I've been thinking a lot about how even when I've had opportunities to be in those newsrooms that maybe have more established like resources to maybe do engagement stuff or like to share their news, it's like we operate specific to Detroit, you know, we do have like a digital divide, you know, people aren't necessarily gravitating towards online media all the time. And I think like, you know, people are getting their information from their phones, or people are getting things from out in the community, or people that they trust, or the radio. And so I think a lot about like, you know, us sitting here right now and having this conversation is reflective of where we can reach people, you know, where we can like be able to provide that information and provide, you know, factual, grounded, value-based information. Because I think like so much of what I feel like was a challenge for me in being a journalist in other spaces was like, okay, like how do I actually stand fully in my values? How do I like create work that speaks to what I believe in? And so the zine was like an evolution of just like wanting to like be in conversation with some of my comrades and organizers across the city and really develop like, what could I do if I actually wanted to like, you know, provide information relevant to community folks? And, you know, I started off talking about like my family and like coming from a community of immigrants. And, you know, there's a lot of grief with like living in the US and being separate from a lot of your extended family.
Right.
And even just moving away from family to live in different parts of the country, not knowing your native language, you know, not being able to practice these cultural traditions that really came up for you. It's a lot. And so I really wanted to create a zine that could reflect like my own journey to process that and honor that in a lot of different ways, through gardening, through food, through music. And so, yeah, I think it's a powerful way to literally provide something physical to people. It's really bite-sized. It can really like force you to like condense like a longer conversation or years of your life into something that's like 10 or 12 pages. So it's exciting, and I'm definitely excited every time I stop by a place in the city and I see other people with zines and they're sharing them out. And I got a little zine bag now that I keep all the things that I've collected, because I think we're really trying to just like reach people in ways where amid like literacy rates declining, amid like all like social isolation, like how can we still communicate and transmute these ideas and inspire people to take action and inspire people to change themselves. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think it's really powerful. I did appreciate the talk about grief in your zine. I thought that was really impactful. And so for me, like I've experienced censorship too. And so I see zines as like a way to combat that, to kind of fight censorship head on, where like we're talking about, where a mass media might censor you, but you have your own independent journalism. Right. You can publish your own zines and distribute them. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, I want to see it just more and more. And I think as an independent journalist, it's a tool that I want to get better at, like distributing more, telling more of my stories via this physical media. I'm just in general a physical media fan, like CDs.
Yeah, you are very analog.
Yes. And then increasingly.
I think that people are becoming more analog though.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many shifts happening in real time for us. And I think like returning back, there's the phrase Sankofa, you have to return before you move forward. And so I think like the process, this moment we're in, is really forcing us to like lean on traditional practices or older methods with new ideas, with greater understanding of how we respond to this moment, what's needed for it. So I'm all for like reimagining physical media and these artifacts as like new tools for this moment.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's really important as like a tool of resistance to, we're recording this right as one of the Prairieland 8 activists was sentenced to 30 years for just distributing zines. And it's just like, and it's incredibly sad and scary, but it's also like, we got to make it worth it, right? We have to keep producing zines. We have to keep producing media that's going to make a difference and change minds and hearts, right?
Yeah, it made me think about, there's a story of Angelo Herndon. I don't know if you've kept up, but he's like, grew up in he either grew up in Ohio or Kentucky, but Black man, member of the Communist Party in the 1930s during the Great Depression era. And, he was handing out pamphlets and was arrested and ultimately like jailed with the idea if he was, inciting an insurrection. And this is around the time of the Scottsboro Boys trial and all these different moments where like, Black people, radicals were really being oppressed and surveilled by the state. For a lot of different reasons, just for, fighting for liberation and for equal rights. And so, the connection between what's happening now and what was happening back then, I mean, it became a huge case across the country, to free Angelo and to like support him and other Black radicals for being oppressed at the time. I think a lot about Paul Robeson and all these other figures that like, we think about in history who have tried to speak truth to power and have been suppressed and pushed out. And so, for as scary as these moments happen, like I think about like, the indictment of or the arraignment of University of Michigan students for their pro-Palestine demonstrations. Like, this oppression is happening with intention to stop our movements. And it's up to us to like continue to use all these different methods to like communicate with folks, whether it's a protest, whether it's a zine, whether it's in your journalism. They'd rather us be silent and docile, but yeah.
That's the point, right? Is they're trying to keep us scared and isolated. And it's important that we're like actually just kind of getting out of our comfort zone and pushing ourselves to be with community as much as possible. and I had a thought and I lost it, but yeah, I mean, it's really tough. But to your point too, there's people have done it before.
Yeah.
In the past. And so I think like a lot of new activists might be kind of feeling fear because of the current Trump administration, and the rise of fascism. But like the reality is that there's always been fascism in the United States. It's literally built on like horrendous acts to Indigenous and Black people. And so it's always been there.
Yeah.
Surveillance has always been there. Suppression of media has always been there. And that's how people have gotten through it in the past, is keeping it going, adapting.
Yeah. I mean, I lean so heavily on my elders to really ground me in this moment. You know, I volunteer at one particular garden. Shout out to Feed 'em Freedom Growers on the east side.
Yeah,
in
Mama
Jefferson
Myrtle.
Chalmers, Mama Myrtle, Baba Wayne. Like, I was very blessed to meet them in the past year or so and really get to like learn from them about how you respond to these various waves of oppression. You know, Baba Wayne himself was a member of the local chapter of the Black Panther parties and was really able to do a lot of meaningful work with the free breakfast program and with distributing the Panthers paper, the intercommunal news service. And I learned a lot from him, and I've continue to learn a lot just about how, you know, not to waver or to lose fear in these moments, but to really dig deep with community and build with folks. And I think that's like, to your point, I think when we're disconnected and isolated from our past, and that comes up in so many ways. Like, you know, I brought a lot of books today, which I think for me, history is a really good way to ground myself.
Yeah.
I really benefit from having studied African American studies, Black studies when I was in college. I was definitely a reader before then, but I really got to like be steeped in so many monumental figures, and also so many like local movements that were happening across the country, and the nuances to them and how people respond to the moment. And I think, you know, we can't duplicate everything that happened and the wins there, but we can definitely like use that to better build out our analysis and better build out how we're gonna meet people. And like one of those ways right now is like ensuring that we can like build community around shared values and shared things. So if it's like, if you can create media that really shares its alignment with people around environmental issues, around like responding to all these different crises. Like I think about what's happening in Huron Valley. I think about what's happening in relation to the city, what we saw earlier this year with Leland House. Like all these different issues are happening, and like creating space to convene people in joyous moments, in moments of agitation, is really important, so that people aren't moved away and ultimately like put on this conveyor of like, I have to go on to the next thing. Like we have to stay grounded in a lot of these issues because they're not going to go away.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Is there anything that you're reading right now that is like impacting you?
So many. Recently I read this book called The 4 Arguments for the Elimination of Television, which I think could also be for the arguments against social media. But it was created by this ad executive who used to, you know, sell all this ads across the country. Started working with like environmental groups to help them create ads, and like really had this epiphany about like obviously capitalism, but also more specifically like how our understanding of like our own knowledge and how we, you know, direct experience and exposure has been stifled by like the media we consume, which has us sort of like feel less actionable about certain things happening in our community. Like we've been increasingly programized, you know, propagandized to like sort of like see, oh, I can't do this. Oh, where's my place isn't into this. And I think that comes up so much in like how we think about organizing, where folks are just left to feel like they have no option or they could just play a really small role. And I think it just made me think like, that just means the work that we're doing, even if it's very small, has meaning, because if it's just shifting the consciousness, shifting people's awareness, like, you know, I don't get to do all these huge exposés in my reporting, but I do get to really tell stories about how people are convening and coming together around major issues. And it to them, whether it's at the neighborhood level, whether it's at the city level, and that's kind of grounded me in the idea that like we need to be doing this work that like disrupts the belief system that like there's not strength in numbers, there's not power, and being in conversation with other people.
Yes, absolutely. If you were to talk directly to newer activists, newer journalists, maybe someone who wants to be considering being a part of the movement but has been propagandized to think that they don't have a place there, what would you tell them?
I would say start really with like what's closest to you. Where do you feel like, for me, gardening as a site for not like volunteering, but organizing was really meaningful because it got me to like step into a space where I could directly meet with my community members. I think anytime you're out in nature, it's healing you actively. It's reprogramming you. It's really letting you return back to a way of being that we've kind of been alienated from in our cities, in our towns, in our communities. So I'm like, yeah, find an event, find an activity, find a thing that you can reoccur and show up to. Take the littlest of commitment, but like if that orients you, if you've already been isolated, I think about like I've been at meetings, community meetings where people are showing up for the first time to be a part of, Ice Watch. People are showing up for the first time to be a part of some of these bigger actions. But these are people's first times really being back in community in a really long time.
Yeah.
And I worry sometimes about like, I want folks to not run away from that at the first moment of crisis or at the first moment of anxiety. It's like, hey.
Or just discomfort.
Yeah.
It can be uncomfortable, like going into community for the first time.
Yeah.
Since probably COVID or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think lately there's been this phrase around like community is inconvenience. It's like it's inconvenient to show up a lot. It's inconvenient, but it's like if you're basing that inconvenience around something that like is making you feel whole again, is returning you to yourself and affirming parts of you that you may have not really had time to really focus on. I think you'll find there's a lot of growth. I think there's a lot of opportunity to really find your lane and to do something, whatever that ends up being. So for the new activists, the new organizers, it's like, yeah, settle into something that you find yourself already sort of curious and interested in and really deepen that. And then from there, you'll just connect with so many other people out in the community, so many people who have so much to share. It wasn't really hard once I started to like show up to things more regularly to really like find out, one, Detroit is a very small town and there's so much interconnectedness between everything. Two, but that there's a role for everybody. Like, I think so much about institutions like General Baker Institute. I think so much about Freedom Growers or Kibalon Village or all these other places around the city where it's like they have a legacy because these are liberated spaces where Black elders have done a lot of work. And I would say, if you're somebody looking to be involved, tap in with them. Tap in with people that already have the analysis, already have the physical space available. And just like, you can learn a lot, listen, we don't got to speak. We can just learn from our elders. And then from there, like fit into some of them like minimal tasks and then grow from there into being the next organizers and activists to lead the charge.
And I think you do a really good job at that too. And like when we started the episode, you were talking about storytelling and wanting to see more representation of your family, your community. What are you hoping for independent journalists and independent journalism in the future?
I hope we see power in our ability to separate ourselves from the apparatus that is media right now, the corporate media space. Like I think, a lot of my work I'm doing out of just a desire to, fight for my people and liberate them and like see the story shift, see storytelling from the bottom up. And I think this isn't, like journalism to me is already a job that typically takes people who are very much value based in their perspective on things. Like you're doing this because you have these visions of maybe a free press or democracy or whatever, but it's like, this isn't profitable. But I think if we can build our own like cooperative models of how to work together, that would be really meaningful. I don't like working solo, and that's why I'm like actively in this space of collaborating, you know, trying to collaborate with you, trying to collaborate with other people like Riverwise.
Yeah, the people's media.
People's media, yeah. Let's build together. Let's build, let's like share the weight of what we're trying to do as, you know, the frayed media workers, culture workers, you know, independent journalists, because like there's a lot of stories in our community,
Yes.
a lot of stories that are not being seen, a lot of people who are being left out. There's this competing narrative that people are fighting off against with the city where, you know, you hear it about Detroit being in this kind of renaissance and like for who, what does that even mean? And so I think responsible media, independent media would constantly challenge that and would take on the perspective of people who have lived through all different types of phases in the city and who can actually like challenge the things that are being said by our public officials or by these, you know, philanthropic donors or these corporate heads that are trying to act like
we haven't been here.
Right. And that the things that they're doing are in the good. I mean, that's the argument around data centers, you know, like I've had to like be in the room to listen to a lot of these developers talk about stuff. And it's just like, you know, it's two speak. It's double. It's like 1984 talks about like the whole double speak, and that thing of like talking out of one side of your mouth. And the other side is really trying to be like, hey, like, we don't care about your communities, or we're trying to actively like, you know, take away your resources for our own benefit to charge AI models that are going to eventually like usurp you out of a job or all these other things. So it's like, yeah, all the layers of how that all goes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I have one more question for you. It's kind of personal. Like, what does living radically mean to you? How do you do that on a daily basis?
I think for me, it's really grounding everything around like my values and the people that I really want to see myself in conversation and liberation with. So, you know, I'm very much trying to be in conversation with my family. I'm trying to be really around other like-minded radicals doing this work. I'm trying to slow down, to resist the ways that our fast food, our fast media, our fast culture kind of doesn't allow us to like go back to the drawing board and really think critically about what it's going to take to fully liberate our people.
Yeah.
So that has meant like waking up in the morning and like going out to my garden and like spending some time watering my plants. It's been bringing in time for joy to kind of balance the things that like I'm already doing that are very heavy. And things not just individually joy, but like collective, you know, like I play soccer. And so trying to play right now, you know, for as problematic and as terrible as the World Cup is, I think it's a moment right now where we have the space to kind of like be in conversation with people of all walks of life and like just be in unity. And like, so I look for those moments to really be in solidarity and in lockstep with my community. Like I'm showing up to Southwest, I'm showing up to Dearborn, I'm showing up everywhere because
and like it's packed too.
Yeah,
it's packed, and like
it's fun.
It can be really fun too, and that's the point. Just have some joy. And once in a while,
we need that. You know, we need to remember. You know, part of the thing I've been thinking a lot about is like the beautiful struggle. Like what's the beautiful element to the struggle? And the thing to me is like the ways that we're creating these spaces, creating these alternative ways of being that aren't just like, you know, these like forced arenas where, you know, corporate media is trying to, or corporate entities are trying to bring us together. But like, no, we're creating, like you're saying, people's media, people's luncheons coming out here at Moondog, you know, all these ways that folks are like trying to like create space for each other outside of like traditional nonprofit or corporate models. I think to me is where I want to be at. So that's where you'll usually find.
That's where I want to be too. That's where you'll usually find me too.
Yeah.
Dope. So we usually ask our listeners on the podcast to take action, step outside of their comfort zone. What are some things that you would suggest for anyone listening to this episode? Yeah,
I mean, specific to like how you consume your own media, I mean, I definitely always support independent media outlets. I've learned a lot over the years through Breakthrough News. They really keep up to date on a lot of global and statewide issues. You know, I look to our Black Liberation Media. They're based off of YouTube, and they also do similar good work and analysis. I mean, there's other bunch of channels, local stuff. Like I collaborate a lot with Planet Detroit and really respect their work. Outlier Media. Specific to what I always say is join an organization, find a space that you can really grow into.
See what you did there.
Yeah.
The gardens.
Yeah. And I feel like right now, we can't be beholden to perfection with the spaces we're in. Like, obviously there's going to be challenges, there're going to be conflict and contradictions, but it's about working through those with community. It's about navigating that with other people and learning to consider them your brother or your sister or your comrade. And so, I definitely, there's so many spaces. I mentioned some before, General Baker Institute. I'm always pointing people out there. It's on the west side on Livernois, and it's a great incubator space for organizers to come to. They definitely, need the support. And just, there are so many other spaces that I'm actively learning about. Like I said, Freedom Growers, I volunteer with, and like Cubalon Village and all these spaces where they're really bringing in the best and the most radical minds in the city. D-Town Farms, all these other spaces, the co-op, they're doing things that I think people should really be tapped into if they want to see a different version and vision of the city than what's being fed to us by the folks that are downtown.
Awesome. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Ethan, for being here and sharing all of your incredible knowledge with us.
Thank you. I appreciate this.
Yeah, thank you. So I just want to say thank you to our listeners. And if you can, share this episode, like and subscribe to our podcast. And also, if you're interested in getting involved on a weekly basis, we do post a weekly action items where we're posting different community events across the city every single week. And that you can find that on our Instagram too. And remember, the revolution may not always be televised, especially in mass media, but it is likely in your own neighborhood and even within yourself. Sending my deepest gratitude to our guest today, Ethan, and our media team, Indy and Alex and Daniel, and also Moondog Cafe, Blue Moon Radio, and all my other collaborators.